according to like everybody on the ground, things are really bad in Gaza, maybe as bad as they've ever been right now. The ceasefire, ended on the 18th, and March 18th, when the Israelis started bombing again. Gaza has now been under a total Israeli blockade for about 2 months. The World Food Program said they are out of food stocks. Gaza's few remaining medical facilities are nearly out of supplies. And at the same time, IDF airstrikes are back to being like daily occurrence. The casualties are way up. In some cases, like dozens of people per day. There's reports that 1,600 people have been killed by Israeli airstrikes since the ceasefire ended. The strikes are often on tents or other temporary structures for displaced people, so there's tons of collateral damage. The Israeli forces there have issued dozens of conflicting evacuation orders, so people are just getting pushed all over the country. According to Reuters, Hamas has offered to release all remaining Israeli hostages in exchange for an end to the war, reconstruction of Gaza, and the release of Palestinian prisoners being held by Israel. But Hamas, the counteroffer from the Israelis is reportedly a demand that they fully disarm as part of any deal, which has ended up being a non-starter for them. So, Ben, I feel like things have been so insane in the Trump era that we have not covered Gaza as frequently as we did during the first year and a half of the war. But it did seem important to highlight just how bad conditions are on the ground and the fact that the parties just seemed like they're nowhere close to any kind of ceasefire deal.
Yeah, but let's look. I just think that this is because Israel doesn't want to end the war, and Netanyahu does not want to end the war. To be specific, because if they were willing to end the war, they would get the hostages out. And the idea that they somehow need to continue to fight a war against Hamas in Gaza, I'm sorry.
There's no security.
There's no security need to do it. It's a literal impossibility that October 7th or anything remotely approaching that, or anything really, in terms of a ground attack on Israelis could happen if the war ended tomorrow. Given the damage that's been done to Hamas, given how militarized that border is between Gaza and Israel. So there's no military necessity to carry out this war. Netanyahu is carrying out for his political purposes, and there are people in his coalition, including maybe Netanyahu himself, who want to carry out to just continue to punish and destroy the Palestinian people, if not ethnically cleanse them from Gaza, which is what a lot of people
that's the Trump
say.
plan.
I mean, that's what Donald, this is something Donald Trump says. It's something the ministers in the Israeli government say. The humanitarian situation can't be, we're not overstating it. Nothing has gotten in since mid-March. Zero. Yeah. We're talking no food, no medicine in a place where there already was no infrastructure left. They destroyed all the hospitals. They destroyed all the schools, destroyed basically all the buildings. And so you're just talking about a place in which an already traumatized, bombarded people, including a lot of injured people, like badly injured people, are being bombed in tents with no food and medicine. That's what's happening.
I was scrolling through Twitter yesterday, and I saw a video of kind of the after results of an airstrike, and there was a little girl sitting on the ground, and all of a sudden her head just started gushing blood like I've never seen anyone bleed in my life. And I realized I was watching the last moments of this little girl's life. And this is happening every single day.
And what makes that okay? What makes that worth doing? Like what? Like, don't evil. Tell me that that's what hostage is being brought home by that. No. You know, so there's an immoral abomination that will be a stain on this country and on Israel for the rest of our lives.
A moral stain, a strategic disaster.
Yeah,
everything about it is wrong and cruel and it's indefensible. And just now that we're all furious about this again, it's worth highlighting this report on Channel 13 News in Israel about the Biden administration's handling of the war in Gaza, the policy generally. So Channel 13 talked to a bunch of top former Biden people, like 9 administration officials. They talked to a bunch of the Netanyahu government. It's all in Hebrew, but a couple sites dropped site news again, and then the Times of Israel did write-ups of the main reporting. And it is both infuriating, not surprising, and confirms a lot of the assumptions we had from the very beginning about kind of what was happening behind the scenes. So one of the most damning quotes came from the Israeli ambassador to the U.S. at the time, who said that, quote, "God did the state of Israel a favor that Biden was the president during this period because it could have been much worse. We fought in Gaza for over a year, and the administration never came to us and said, ceasefire now. It never did. And that's not to be taken for granted." So he's obviously trying to give Joe Biden credit there, and in so doing, offering the most damning observation you could about the administration. A couple more things that jumped out at me, Ben. The administration reportedly debated having Biden give a speech that presented the Israeli people 2 paths in the hopes of forcing an election. One path was get a hostage deal, get a ceasefire, get a normalization agreement with the Saudis. The other path was what we're seeing now, endless war, diplomatic isolation. But ultimately, Biden just chickened out and didn't want to push Bibi politically, and instead did that speech where he laid out the framework for a ceasefire deal that I guess Netanyahu had told him he agreed to, but later walked away from. There was some stuff in the story about how Biden's team was particularly angry with Netanyahu when he released that video accusing them of implementing a broad freeze on weapon shipments, when in reality, Biden had only held a single shipment of 2,000-pound bombs, and that freeze was about to be resolved. So I guess the Netanyahu response, destroyed the deal they were about to cut to ship the bombs. And so reading that, I was like, I get the frustration of these Biden staffers here because they're mad that Netanyahu lied about them, but it's also very telling that the biggest point of frustration was Biden not getting credit for having sent enough arms.
They're mad about that and not about the 2,000-pound bombs being dropped on kids. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, so I just, it's a lot about the Saudi normalization deal. There's people admitting what was obvious all along, that Netanyahu was blocking a ceasefire for political purpose. So again, like I said at the top, this was obvious at the time. We talked about it at the time. Rereading it was absolutely enraging. It was a reminder all over again of what a total fucking disgrace the Biden administration's policy on Gaza was. The just unrequited, obsessive loyalty to Netanyahu blinded him to the carnage and total immorality of the policy and the U.S. complicity in that policy. And it's outrageous.
Yeah, what's really enraging about this, there are different layers of it. But first of all, and you summed it up well, to try to add to that, look, it was obvious at the time that they were not really pressing them for this ceasefire. This just kind of confirms what we knew. And that's what a lot of us are angry about, that they were not implying any leverage. They weren't doing anything to try to really push a ceasefire. They were saying, so this is the second thing, is they were saying at the time, we're working relentlessly. They were not. They were not working relentlessly for a ceasefire. They were talking about it publicly so that they had something to say. And then privately, they're just shoveling weapons at Netanyahu and mainly complaining that Netanyahu wasn't giving them enough credit for shoveling the weapons to him, I mean, it's very revealing that they were upset by Netanyahu making that video because that's about the politics of it. They were so inside the politics of it that they weren't looking at the conduct of what was being done in Gaza in the same way. The other things I'd like to say about this, the first thing is that I think that they might believe that they were doing more than they were. They, and I'm not saying this to absolve them, anything but. I think they don't, the Israeli ambassador's words are so damning because he's making clear it was a choice for the United States to unreservedly back what Israel did for that whole year. That was a choice. It wasn't something that happened because of gravity. It wasn't something that happened because politics inevitably means you support Israel unconditionally. Joe Biden made a choice to provide unconditional military support to this Israeli government and this military operation. And just mouthing words of concern about the scale of loss of life doesn't matter. You made that choice. Another thing, this Saudi normalization thing kept coming up. I don't understand why they missed this opportunity. Right. Because you fundamentally, and what is amazing to me is some of these people are people that kind of put themselves forward as experts on Israel. It's fundamentally misunderstanding this Israeli government. Given the choice between having commercial flights between Riyadh and Jerusalem and ethnically cleansing Gaza, of course they're going to choose to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Why do we understand this Israeli government better than you do? Even just
even more pathetic and selfish, the choice between direct flights to Riyadh or Netanyahu staying in power.
Exactly. Yeah, there you go. That's right. Because with Netanyahu it's staying in power, with Ben Gvir and Smotrich, it's the West Bank and Gaza. The West Bank and Gaza are much more important than a Saudi normalization deal. And so we're still talking about Israel as if it's our version of what our version of Israel, or Democratic Party foreign policy version of Israel, is well, of course they'll want normalization with Saudi Arabia more than they'll want to kill the two-state solution and try to take back West Bank and Gaza. That's misreading this government. The last thing I want to say, Tommy, is and we can have a conversation about this. I try to hold some space here because if you've listened to this podcast for 6-7 years, I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for you. but I think you've probably gone through a similar process. But I've had to deprogram a bit.
Totally.
I was much more defensive in 2017 about
For sure.
drone
It takes a while.
strikes or things that we did that we were part of some things that were wrong. We were part of actually because some things that are just baked into U.S. national security are wrong, right? And it's been nice to have this forum and to interact, obviously, with so many people around the world, and force us to not do that. To be more honest about. And I'm not suggesting we're all the way there yet. My advice to these people, some of whom we know well, some of whom are our friends, is don't do that. Like, don't rationalize, don't explain the best spin. Don't try to pick the one time that Biden said something that makes it look like you pressured Israel. Like, in fact, don't talk about it at all right now. I actually wondered why 9 people talked to Channel 13 in Israel. Sit with this. Think about it. Like absorb it. Listen to people in Gaza. Consume those images. And I'm not. I don't want this to come across preachy. I really don't. I say this as someone who did that thing of defending everything we did and tying myself in knots. It's not healthy, so this is not me. I swear to God, this is not, I'm not trying to come at this from some highfalutin place. I'm saying actually as someone who's, that's the wrong path. There's another path of, because actually it'd be good for American foreign policy and Democratic Party national foreign policy for people to truly evolve and be like, that's wrong.
And give courage to the next generation of foreign policy staffers who are scared that they are going to get destroyed by AIPAC or these groups that are attacking, YouTubers like Miss Rachel if she, speaks about the humanity of the Palestinian people. Like break that cycle. I'm totally with you on the broader point that it took me forever to do a better job of thinking for myself, gaining perspective, reading more, learning more. Like, you just grow as a human being. You understand more. But also, just on this narrow policy, I guess what I'd ask people is, I don't care how hard Joe Biden worked a problem.
Nobody cares.
What I care is about the outcome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And look at what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
Like, it is a fucking disaster. More people are dead. 1,600 people are dead since the ceasefire ended. That you guys couldn't get over the finish line. That Trump somehow got over the finish line. And I know these are not easy problems. They're brutally hard. Every option after October 7th was a bad option. But blind loyalty to Bibi Netanyahu, a right-wing autocrat, was a massive mistake. And we just have to acknowledge that because of the damage it did to the people in Gaza, but also the damage it did to the Democratic Party. Yeah,
it's indefensible. And the thing is, sometimes you're programmed to think about, because you actually don't come to work thinking you want to do that. You come to work thinking you want a ceasefire. You come to work thinking, we just need to get through this and maybe the next phone call with Bibi, it'll work out. But part of what you have to wrestle with is, to your point, just the fact that you were in a lot of meetings and you stayed up late and a lot of phone calls were made and trips were made. The world experiences the outputs. It's kind of like what we're saying with Trump in reality. And the reality is that the system that was built is part of the problem. The system that was built to just shovel those weapons to the Israeli government, that's part of the problem. And you're never going to change that system if you're just defending how you managed the system at the time.
Yeah, and by the way, hands up, right? Barack Obama signed a 10-year MOU that provided $3 billion a year to the Israeli government.
And we did that in part because we were defensive about the Iran deal. Yep. Wrong. We shouldn't have done that. We knew who Bibi was. We should not have signed a 10-year memorandum. I'm sure I defended it at the time. That was wrong. That system that was a part of was the wrong system. And you'll never really change the system if you're kind of constantly defending your management of it,
Yeah, and just one last point on this. I mean, of the 9 people, officials quoted in that story, and I honestly don't even know who all of them are because I didn't watch the video. I just read the reports. I mean, I think probably a couple were actually in high-level meetings with Joe Biden all the time. This is not a staff problem. There were clearly some staffers who I think were in a bad place and providing very, very bad advice to Joe Biden, but this begins and ends with him. This was clearly a problem
100%.
He owned to the great detriment of the policy outcome, but also to himself politically.
Yeah.
Because, again, I've been reading the Jake Tapper book. I can't get into all the details of it. But it's clear, at some point, Biden just started spending all of his time doing Ukraine and Gaza stuff, and like didn't get either of those problems solved, and forgot everything else he needed to do for a re-election. It's a fucking
and
disaster.
it's 100% right that we have to. It begins and ends with Joe Biden. It was his policy choice, and you're right. Like the vast majority of the staff, like totally different people could have been there, and the result would have been exactly the same. The reason I think it's important though for staff to wrestle with these things when they're out of government is that's the only way that things change when you come back.
Oh,
into
absolutely.
government,
No,
right?
I totally agree with
Or
you.
you want the next Democratic presidential candidates to have staff or advisors who've learned some things, and digested these things. So that's the evolution I would encourage.
If the next person who works on foreign policy for a Democrat says hug Bibi,
Yeah.
they need to be
That
walked
person-
out of the building.
yeah,
Pete Hegseth them out of the building that minute.
Yeah, and we know who gives that advice, and you don't need to listen to those people.
Don't listen to those people.